Hi there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Crystal Wittevrangle, collaborating with Common Sense Calgary, here today with Harrison Clark, who is running for City Council in Ward 9 in Calgary's upcoming elections. Harrison, thank you so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.
This is awesome. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about you and the background that you're bringing with you when you enter City Council.
Absolutely. So Harrison Clark, independent candidate for Ward 9. I think that's like great to say this particular election cycle. I'm a small business owner, entrepreneur. I've been in Inglewood for 8 years, running a retail business, and served on my business association there at the with the BIA as a director on the board. And prior to that work, I worked for the government of Alberta. I did community and stakeholder relations management for one of the constituency offices, and we sort of worked to provide support in upstream flood mitigation for the community of Bowness, and oversaw sort of some of the work to complete the West Calgary Ring Road.
Mm.
So I think that's like relevant experience, especially coming, sort of looking towards another government body and the work that might be ahead.
Absolutely. And so what do you think are the core priorities in this, upcoming election and how are you best positioned to kind of tackle some of those?
Yeah, thank you. I will say I've put a year of my life into this work so far. I started in November of last year because there's 17 communities in Ward 9, and many of them come with long multi-generational stories. And I
Hmm.
sort of knew that on the outset, um, but wasn't totally sure of what that meant really. And yeah, so I set out on affordability, safety, and a fair share of investment for Ward 9. Certainly on affordability and safety, because each one of us has a relationship or something to say about that. It felt like a great conversation starter,
Hmm.
and a fair share of investment for this area as a statement, because these are inner city neighborhoods, and we're certainly in need of some further investment as we look to what comes next for us as a 2 million person city, and for these communities that are really maturing.
Absolutely. And so affordability really, to me, ties into property taxes. And
Yeah.
so residents are feeling the pinch and saying that further increases really feel unsustainable. What are your thoughts on that and perspectives on what should be done with property taxes in the city?
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad to have an opportunity to speak directly to it. Of course, I won't suggest like I know everything about it, but uh, I am a person who pays business association taxes for the privilege of being on Ninth Avenue. I pay commercial property taxes and I pay residential property taxes in Ward 9. So I feel very well invested anyway. um, but yeah, certainly on the doors. I mean, there's always a conversation about the cost of living and the city's role in that with property taxes. In historic and established neighborhoods, you have to remember that some of these folks have lived in these homes for 40 or 50 years.
Hmm.
They're the original owners, the people that bought them in the 60s and
Yeah.
70s. And so as those costs increase, you're talking about sort of compression of a limited income, or and so what can we do about it? And I think for me, what I hear from folks a lot is, what do I get for these taxes? We're
Hmm.
usually standing on their front porch, and it's like, I can't point to where this money is going. Where is it going? And why do they need more?
Yeah.
And so that's a really valid concern. And at least from the perspective of here we have a client, right? If we were to sort of shift this to business perspective, it's like we have a client who's like we're not meeting the mark in terms of value for dollar. They don't know what they're getting. It's not adding up. So that's a problem that I think we could remedy, certainly through better communication and maybe even clarity of like what we're investing in and why. Um,
Hmm.
and I do apologize. I find like on a webcam when I'm not in person, I tend to ramble a little bit. So,
No,
um,
no.
but yeah, so I find that to be something we could certainly do. I would like to see what we could do with the existing budget. I mean, now there's a conversation about a 5.5% increase again.
Hmm.
Simultaneously, this year we found 250 million extra dollars, and so to me, something doesn't add up, And I think when we talk to these folks and they say, "Listen, I've had these potholes on my street for the last 5 years. I've been calling the city to help repair this sidewalk for the last 10 years." Uh,
Hmm.
it's like here are some of these like minor issues that add up to a lot of what people are just what they'd like to see those dollars spent on. And
Hmm.
we could sort of get back to that instead of always pushing this to overarching, broad, enormous, make Calgary a world-class city investments. To me, always like the thing is, a world-class city is a city that provides world-class amenities and services to its residents.
Hmm.
And I find us constantly reaching for those people who might come and visit us and the impression we might leave with them.
Yeah.
I don't find that to be a good investment strategy.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And that kind of goes to like the role of city government. What should city government be doing? And it is those things, like you said, those keeping our streets livable and not in disrepair. Um, and so spending is the other side of that. So we seem to have a spending problem. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah. I think that, like, I have to say, like, a year of time in this work, and I really came at it with the priority that I wanted to be able to speak very clearly about this particular ward, these particular communities. And I want to be a counselor that sort of comes to the table with our best interests in mind. And
Hmm.
I think, as a voter myself, it's like, what do I want to see out of a council? I want to see a group of 15 individuals that come to the table with the interests of these communities. I want them to know them inside and out and what
Hmm.
those minor investments look like on a regular basis.
Hmm.
Because I think it's, we've heard the phrase like back to basics. And I think to that end, it's meeting these basic needs that
Hmm.
in many ways have gone unmet. We could sort of like get back to that. I think that'd be really valuable. In terms of overspend, yeah, I mean, it's a tricky scenario. I think part of managing an organization like a city, like a municipality, is to acknowledge that we have to make uh, we have to make investments for the future and
Hmm.
like sort of for the projections of what we see that future to be. And
Hmm.
I think in some ways we've kicked the can on a number of things that are coming back to sort of say hello again, right? We saw this water crisis. I mean, that's an infrastructure canary, just hello, remember us, like,
Yeah.
and then this green line is another major expense. And I
Hmm.
think a person coming forward today who's heard about this my whole life, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is the project we should have invested in 40 years ago.
Hmm.
And now what we're dealing with are the, the outcomes or the, sort of the impacts of not doing that. So now it's going to cost so much money and it's going to be a real burden. We can't figure out how to like sort of get it through downtown, et cetera. But the point being that, because we didn't do these investments then, we need them
Hmm.
twice as bad today.
Yeah.
And it won't make sense for us to be a city of 2 or 3 million people without this kind of infrastructure. So it's that lack of foresight.
Hmm.
I guess hindsight's 2020, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. And some folks have said that, they perceive city council to have pet projects
Mhm.
rather than some of these core infrastructure needs.
Yeah.
Um, do you agree with that statement, or are you more focused on having core infrastructure be met, at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Um, I would say I think about myself and what I'd like to see happen in Ward 9, and I'll give an example. So the Inglewood pool is likely to be, it will be lost. Like it's going to come off the books in another fiscal year.
Hmm.
And so the question is, what does Ramsey, Inglewood, and Bridgeland do for inner city recreation?
Yeah.
So one of the proposals I've come forward with is an inner city recreation hub. I think that we have to visit what life looks like and what it
Hmm.
feels like in the inner city, and make the space for a recreation hub that's reflective of that. I
Hmm.
don't know that it looks like one of these $300 or $400 million epicenters in Seaton, as an example.
Yeah.
So let's find out what that integration piece looks like. That would probably be the most expensive thing that I have suggested that we work towards.
Hmm.
But I think it has far-reaching impacts for the inner city as a whole for this city. I
Hmm.
think it sort of speaks to like we are inevitably going to see larger groups of individuals moving to this city for the urban lifestyle that a city of 2 million people can provide.
Hmm.
So this has been a very suburban city for many decades now, and I think that people will still arrive with that in their hearts, and that's what they'd like to have. But I think
Hmm.
it's important to acknowledge again emerging need. We're going to have more of these individuals arriving for that urban lifestyle, and so
Yeah.
gutting the infrastructure from our inner cities is not the way to move forward. You talk about costs. I mean, we've sprawled to a place where I don't know that I don't know how much more of this we can maintain on an annual basis. to sprawl. It's quite expensive. It just is, frankly, it's very expensive to do. Yeah.
And so you had mentioned that the city has this budget surplus and it is expected to be somewhere north of 200 million, if I recall. What do you think should be done with that money? Should it be put into a reserve fund? Should it be rebated to taxpayers? What are your thoughts?
This is an exciting thought. And I understand, listen, new people come forward. We have bold ideas. I hope that you would expect that out of folks who want to come forward and take leadership positions. So in my policy outline, I have a fiscal sort of management, fiscal responsibility piece that I put forward, partially because, again, I came forward on a fair share of investment for this area. And of course, I asked myself the question, and a few astute people on the doors have said too, well, are you sure we're not getting our fair share of investment? It's like, it's a statement to evoke a feeling, certainly, but yeah, what are the metrics of that? And so I'd like to see some forward-facing sort of outlines of how money's being spent, where it's being spent, and how it's being shared. And one of the other things I've said as a sort of pilot potential is taking portions of this budget and allotting them to each ward as an opportunity for community to make its own investments. By no means do I suggest that $200 million should be, sort of divided by 14 or 15 wards here. But, in my policy outline, I suggested even $100,000 so that a community like Forest Lawn can decide to finally fully fund its skate park, that right now is just a cement pad that gets flooded every time it rains. It's like not much to do there. Or a community garden in Dover, or, what is and allow these, I think in that way, that's sort of like one singular thing, but okay, this $200 million, I don't believe the idea of giving it back per se in a check. Like, I mean, by the time you administer that, we're going to eat up tons of it. It's like, it's in the funds. What do we do with it? It should be something, if nothing else, like, again, these potholes, these holes in the fence, the sidewalks that have gone unfixed. Like, let's take care of the fundamentals.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good way to spend that money,
Yeah, exactly. And so, shifting gears a little bit, when we talk about housing, everybody's in support of affordable housing, or I assume most people are. What is your stance on affordable housing and the city's role in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because as I sort of set out to do the work, I constantly ask myself, what can I really do here? I don't want to come out and make a whole bunch of promises that are unrealistic, or, it's like, what really can be achieved by a city councillor? And so I did come forward with a couple of ideas. I mean, I imagine it might come up even later. Blanket rezoning is something I talk about every single day. And so I'm ready to go and to talk about it. But to that end, it's like, we've sort of left the private market to sort of fulfill a social need, and it hasn't been able to do that, I don't think. And it's really, when I think about, you have to understand that Ward 9 represents, we're talking Renfrew to Ogden, we've got Bridgeland and Inglewood and Ramsey, and even Southview and some of these other older communities on the East End. Like, these are really well established. And when you knock 3 houses down in a row, on a street that's looked the same for 100 years, it has an impact. And so, and then to also suggest that, $650,000 to $850,000 is an entry point into the housing market. Like, to who? Like, when?
Yeah.
I don't know them. That's not me. It's like, so I find that to be a bit, we've got to do more than that, I suppose. Yeah. And so I've put forward a couple of thoughts. One of them being, what are the city lands available in Ward 9? I would like to see the inventory of that, get a sense of what's available. We have a number of not-for-profit sort of organizations that specialize in non-market cooperative housing models. And so how do we address that need in Ward 9? And if we're to sort of streamline bureaucratic process, let's make sure it's for organizations like that the permitting process is simple, it's made efficient, so we can truly bring affordable housing online. Secondly, I brought up, interesting to Ward 9, again, and maybe a bit of an artistic lens here, but in some cases, in communities like Ogden and Ramsey and Dover and Inglewood, one side of the street is residential, the other side is industrial. That's how close that industrial sort of experience is to these communities as it is. So if we're going to offer sort of rezoning opportunities for individuals who own property, what about some of these legacy industrial lands? And I'm certainly not talking the metals recycling plants or any of these chemical, but there's lots of old warehouses and lots of there's acres of land that is sort of just given the opportunity to, shift this to mixed use. Suddenly this land has new value and perhaps, could be brought online. And we could be then expanding the footprint of historic communities,
Yeah.
and a sort of semi-industrial sort of lifestyle in Ramsey is like honors the history of the area while expanding the footprint, right? I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
marvelous. And finally, if I can, because affordable housing is the thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to tell you that we have a number of mobile home parks in Ward 9,
Okay.
and I have spent time in them and with the people there. Some of them are from Midfield, if you remember that scenario that played out. These people are living at what has traditionally been for almost 100 years the version of affordable housing that we've had. And, all they want is that. It's all that they want. And they're under an immense amount of pressure all the time with increasing lot fees. It's like, I have a hard time, like, if we're going to have a sincere conversation about affordable housing, we have to look at the affordable housing that exists and make sure that those people are in a secure position.
Yeah.
Because it's a good quality of life. There's community there. Oftentimes it's seniors on fixed incomes, often without their spouses, and they sort of build these communities of support for one another. And but they're under a lot of pressure. So
yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the blanket rezoning, which is definitely something I hear a lot about. I'm sure you hear a lot about it.
yeah.
What is your perspective on that policy?
Yeah. I mean, okay, so it came forward with good intentions as far as I can tell, right? I mean, I hate to just land right in the anger of it, and there's a lot of anger. It's only gotten louder over the course of the year, which is fine, and I understand it because I've stopped to listen and hear what it's about. So I respect it, but yeah, I mean, so set out good intentions, streamline bureaucratic process, bring more affordable housing online faster. I mean, it sounds reasonable to me, right? But that's not what's happened, and I think when you apply a blanket policy to an entire city like this, maybe this is that sort of like, subtle nudge to say we're mature enough now that that kind of thing doesn't land in a community like Ramsey, doesn't land in a community like Renfrew. The expectations are different there, and it's taken generations to build that out. So to come in and sweep it out is just. So my thought is, in terms of what I would do, I would like to come forward with some policies specific to sort of some amendments to this policy specific to my communities to make sure that the historic nature of these communities is respected, that our tree canopy, our mature tree canopy is respected, that, sort of like the way in which we develop in these communities is reflective of the lifestyle, again, that's taken generations to build here. If that can't be achieved, of course, because I'm talking in the hypothetical sense of who else will I be working with? It might just come up that it's got to go,
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I will certainly be an advocate to make sure that we honor the point. Like, let's make sure bureaucratic process is better. City councilors and administration is expensive, and spending all of this time focusing on every individual one of these things, is that the best use of our time if we're going to be fiscally responsible? So I would just look to revisit it with the lessons learned from this experience, and hope to do better.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you intend to go forward with rebuilding trust with people who felt that they, spoke loudly in opposition and felt that city council really just turned a blind eye to that and went forward with it anyways?
Yeah, I'll tell you that, and I won't speak. I mean, I will say that from my experience, and I'm sure it's true of many of the other people running this cycle, it is an uphill experience to sort of even come forward in any sense of earnest sincerity to say, I'd like to support you. I would like to build trust. It's like people are very, trust has been eroded almost like at leisure, almost for fun, it seems. And so everybody coming forward now, it's going to be a big part of what comes next over the next number of years. I will look to be in community. I think, we've got to be at the table with our community associations. They're an untapped resource in terms of what's happening, community sentiment, and what people would like to see even happen. I mean, and so we've got to sort of return to that table and return to the streets. I mean, door knocking is a wonderful experience, And I think that if you're going to run for office, I know for myself, again, I'll speak for me, door knocking doesn't end if I win, when I win.
Mhm.
You know, it's like I will continue this work all the way through because people need to see you there.
Yeah.
I've done 7 community cleanups this year. I've thrown more sofas into garbage trucks than I ever have before, and that was amazing. But I was at Forest Heights, and they hadn't seen someone there in years, years and
Yeah.
years and years. And I'm throwing sofas and old mattresses with like a 70-year-old man who's been volunteering there for 15 years. You know, it's like these things are kind of that's indicative of bad health. Like they're just not. It's not in good. These associations aren't necessarily always in good health.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's something to be said for putting big policies like this that impact everybody in the city through a bit more of a stringent review or considering it a little bit more. What are your thoughts on perhaps a plebiscite on issues like this or big policy decisions?
Yeah, it's a good question. A plebiscite, I mean, I'd be happy to sort of explore the idea in theory with you. I don't have like a firm, like, yeah, this is absolutely what should, because I find it probably to be circumstantial.
Yeah.
And so in the hypothetical, like, of course, it makes sense to bring the question to the public in a
Hmm.
way that makes good sense. I think what I'm noticing, at least on the ground level in community in ward, which I'm sure translates very well to the city process, is that we have to acknowledge that our communication styles have changed. They're
Hmm.
not what they were 20 years ago. They're not what they were 30 years ago, certainly. And so coming to city council and having to wait 6 hours to like speak your piece is like, first of all, very exclusive.
Hmm.
It's very exclusive, the group of people that are able to do that. And so
Hmm.
you hear one particular point of view. And even, so I think we've got to sort of look at the way in which we gather information, gather insight from community on their
Hmm.
opinions about these things, and make sure that it's adaptive and sort of collected in real time,
Hmm.
and perhaps that information's made public in ways that we can then further, disseminate what that information might mean
Hmm.
before we land at a conclusion. But somehow it's like it's a big weighty process, but the decision has to be made in 2 weeks, and so they sort of try to cram this whole thing through, and it's just so it's not lining up.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can confirm that there's something wrong. A plebiscite does make sense. It sounds expensive, but depending on the issue and how much that it might be particularly worth to the citizens of the city, maybe that is worth the cost.
Hmm. Yeah, it like a policy that is, one size fits all, saying yes to a plebiscite is not a one size fits all either. So I appreciate that it is, context specific. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the Green Line already,
Hmm.
but I'd like to dig a little bit further with you there and your perspectives on kind of how that has unfolded and, what people are feeling and seeing when we're, seeing cost overruns yet again, shorter track and issues just seem to kind of be abounding.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on the Green Line and how this has unfolded?
Yeah, it's like so fundamentally the project we should have built 40 years ago, we're now dealing with the repercussions of that. And so now we've got to wear it. In this process of running for council, I was invited to the Building Trade Association's luncheon,
Okay.
excuse me, luncheon, as a conversation that they wanted to have with municipal candidates, something they'd never done before. So I was really glad to attend. And it's like from the outset, I don't have any grounding in sort of construction necessarily, but you think there's like contracts are generally awarded to like sort of one of a few companies over and over again, right? And then they subcontract out, and you just wonder how competitive that is. And then I went to this luncheon and sort of heard from those folks there about sort of union labor and the real underlying crisis of sort of uh, people coming in without the skills,
Mhm.
taking sort of cash under the table for these labor jobs. And, so like the long term, you sort of have to go back and you have to patch these things up, or, they weren't set properly. So then they have to be redone. It's like, you think, yeah, $75 an hour for a union person to sort of do a job sounds expensive. But if it has the longevity to carry
Mhm.
us through, twice as long, 3 times, 5 times as long as and these people are still charging union rates. They're just paying these
Mhm.
people less.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, listen, I know that I'm pulling on a thread there that could is in a lead to an entirely different kind of conversation. But I think that's obviously something that needs to be explored.
Mhm.
I, as a candidate for Ward 9 and potentially the councillor of Ward 9, will have to oversee 5 train stations in the approved version of the Green Line as it stands. And
Mhm.
that's an exciting endeavor, but certainly the pressure's there. These have to be well integrated with these communities. They have
Mhm.
to be connection points for pedestrians, cyclists, and those with motor vehicles. They have to feel safe at all hours of the day, 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
And so that's, environmental design, making sure that these, again, integrate nicely and sort of don't leave room for trouble. And if we do it well, we'll be able to point to it and say, look at how this has gone. This is great. Let's keep going. If it
Yeah.
doesn't, then I think those that have never really wanted to see this project come through for whatever reason, they'll be able to point to it and say, this isn't it. So
Mhm.
it'll be much harder to continue, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so, you bring up an interesting point with the safety of transit. And, we need to consider that in new stations, but in our existing transit infrastructure, safety is a major concern. I know many people who refuse on the basis of safety to take
Oh, yeah,
transit.
for sure.
What are your thoughts on the city's current transit strategy as it relates to safety?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll just sort of use this, what's coming in, as a quick example as I lead into this. But so at Ogden Road, we're meant to have Ogden Station for the Green Line.
Hmm.
Ogden Road is a historic commercial corridor that's been in that community for pretty much 100 years. And it's sort of at the tail end of a cycle here. We've got some boarded up buildings, and the Ogden block is there. It's also like, is it going to be demolished? Will it not be? But the community there are quite concerned about like who's going to come and spend time there, and or what's it going to bring. And I
Hmm.
think, if you stand on a street with boarded up buildings that's kind of empty and, not well lit, I mean, what do we think is going to happen, Um, and so it's really important. Like, one of the proposals I put forward is, let's designate Ogden Road as a main street. Let's like redo those roads so that, again, all forms of transportation can move smoothly and safely, and,
Hmm.
sort of rejuvenate this space, because that's integrating a station like that into community.
Hmm.
And so that, to me, is what comes next for us. What
Hmm.
what does exist for us in transit? We have done this sort of like, we don't have fare checks, like the fare station stops, or the
Yeah.
pay gates, I guess is what they're called.
Hmm.
The last time that I heard about that, it was sort of the city deemed it to be too expensive to integrate. So
Hmm.
$250 million found in a bank account we didn't know we had. Maybe, like, maybe that's a place to put it again, because uh, we don't want to, for some reason, we do not want to acknowledge that an individual living in the city of Calgary in 2040 is likely to be integrated into our and utilizing these services in
Yeah.
major ways. Even our high earning, income, they'll take their car to the mountains on the weekend and they'll have one. I'm not saying they won't, but it's a regular part of life in every metropolitan city,
Hmm.
and we just keep dragging our feet. And so we underfund it, it becomes unsafe, and we have every reason to point to it and say this doesn't work because we've done
Hmm.
nothing about it.
Yeah. And so, in addition to something like fare gates, what else do you think might be helpful in the safety aspect? Like, do you see
I think
like
about
uniformed
other,
officers?
yeah, for sure. I think about other metropolitan cities I've visited in Europe and across Canada. Certainly, we've got 24-hour, you've got sort of like film on, everything's being video recorded, and there is
Hmm.
security right there. So
Yeah.
if an altercation begins on a platform, somebody is coming out of a station room and entering the platform to have
Hmm.
like, you know what I mean? Like, the presence is known immediately. I
Yeah.
think that's really important. And yeah, I mean, sure, people pay gates. Yeah, you spend all the money to put them up. People will still jump them. People are still, of course they will. But I think it's just that reactivity. We have to be there. We have to be present. It's like the rule is safety. The rule
Hmm.
is safety in order in that instance, not the,
Hmm.
what's going to happen. You talked about your friends who don't want to go because they don't know what's going to happen. You know,
Hmm.
we have to, that's the confidence that has to be rebuilt.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Speaking of rebuilding, that gets me thinking about the water main break, that we've had, lasting repercussions. Some people are very worried about what this means for the infrastructure of the city in other areas. What are your thoughts on how the city managed that crisis, everything from risk management through communications?
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting as I can speak to this like as an individual who went through it, right? Because we all did. And so I think about the backyard conversations we had that summer, and you sort of everyone was talking about it.
Hmm.
And so yeah, disappointing that it happened. It sounds like some stuff was sort of left forgotten or sort of unacknowledged, and so we have this major break in terms of communication breakdown. Most individuals that I spoke with felt like either there was like sort of a half truths or incomplete stories being told,
Hmm.
which I think, in communications is tricky. What do you say? What information do we really have?
Hmm.
And what can we really say for sure? And I think when that happens in real time, just to give credit to, that scenario, it's like that's difficult. And you don't always get it right. We've seen that a lot lately, though. So
Hmm.
lessons, come on, learn the lessons. Um, but, just to be honest with folks right off the bat, and the reports that followed, I know that like some counter reports, some individual organizations have come forward and said they'd like to do their own assessments. And um, does that, sorry, I kind of rambled there.
No,
Sorry.
no, no, no. And what are your thoughts on what needs to be done for the city to prioritize critical infrastructure moving forward so that we are less likely to see something so catastrophic in the future?
Yeah. What we have fallen into the habit of, and you know why? Because it costs popularity, but things become avoided at City Hall because people don't want to carry the weight of the
Hmm.
cost.
Yeah.
I'm a new candidate running for council, and if I have to come to the table and tell you folks that this is going to be an expensive cycle, it's devastating to one's own personal
Hmm.
experience. Let's just like,
Yeah.
like pull the curtains back on that. Let's let the light out on it, right? I think what we are missing though are the individuals to come forward and do that and to say it.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's like because what happens is we've had 20 years of these folks sort of pushing this down the way, sort of, oh, we can, next budget, next budget, next budget. Well, then something like this happens, and all the while, Calgarians have been paying their taxes, and it's like this is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So now it's a lose, 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 lose.
Hmm.
So to the common sense group that watches this, I want you to know I might have to come forward and say, like, listen, there's expense, there are things that we have to invest in, including this kind of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Because if we don't catch it up, it's only going to cost us more later if we haven't
Hmm.
learned that already.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always the politics piece that I think escapes a lot of people, where it's not in a candidate's interest and it's not a sexy issue either. Like a sexy issue is like a park, or like getting something that you can see and feel and people can use. Uh, Pipes, that's not it.
Yeah, it's like,
Um,
sorry, folks, we're gonna have to spend $300 million on something you will never see.
yes, yeah. So it's hard.
You can
It's a
imagine
hard
the
sell.
headlines even. I mean, it's like the media doesn't do us any favors either. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
it's definitely a hard sell.
it's important to acknowledge that this is because we've had decades, not just the group behind us right now, but certainly like many, many sort of cycles of council that have made the decision to push it and push
Hmm.
it. And we're just in a number of ways now realizing we can't push this any further. I think
Hmm.
that's like the underlying, what did I learn from the water break thing? It's like, oh, we're kind of at that point now where it's time.
Yeah. Yeah,
It,
definitely. And it also, it speaks a bit more to the transparency piece with the public, but also to the relationship piece with the public. And then I'm also thinking with the provincial government. And so the the relationship there has seemed quite tenuous over the past few years. And it's left residents kind of wondering how city council can work effectively with the current provincial government. What are your thoughts on, and like, what will you do to kind of rebuild that trust so that you can have a good working relationship with the provincial government?
for sure. I think what's really important to note is that you're right. Like I would say the relationship as a voter myself and somebody, a Calgarian observing it play out on a number of these things, our council has done not a great job of having that relationship with the province. I think they're both at fault, certainly.
Hmm.
But what I think I see as somebody who wants to be on that council is we have an sort of a divided council. And a lot of these folks have been entrenched. They've been there for like 20 years. Like,
Hmm.
they're very entrenched in themselves and in their own points of view. And, it just became this like really hard line between this group. So can you imagine like a board of directors of any corporation with that kind of fight happening amongst them, then going to do a major company defining deal with
Hmm.
another company? It's like, I don't know, like you just wouldn't want that at all. And so I
Hmm.
think what's exciting is we're going to see a number of these seats flip over, and there'll be a fresh, diverse perspective, I'm sure, at council. But as
Hmm.
Calgarians, and to every other, to every candidate who might see this, or I hope that we as a group can appreciate our differences, but acknowledge what we are intending to do. We're here to
Hmm.
support the city of Calgary. We're here to support the citizens of this city. Let's arrive to that negotiation table as a unified group, with that in mind. That has to be the individual thing, and the allegiance has to be there. I mean, you're swearing an oath to the citizens of this city to do the best that you can.
Hmm.
And I understand, like the ties with Edmonton can feel quite strong, and we have sort of this, kind of blurred line in this province in a big way. I'm sure it's true everywhere, but your responsibility is here and for the corporation of the city of Calgary.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we've seen some of that relationship with the province play out with the supervised consumption site in downtown Calgary, where the city is kind of taking a back seat or trying to take a front seat, or, at some points looking like they're not taking a seat at all. And so, what do you think should be done with the supervised consumption site? Should it remain where it is? Should it be relocated? What do you think is the best move?
As I understand it, like, hasn't it come forward as a campaign promise to close it this cycle? Just so I'm totally like aware that it's meant to close.
I think it's been said to be closed, but then we need to figure out where would it be relocated to and what criteria would guide that decision. I think, as far as I know, it's still quite a big question mark.
Okay. I'll speak only because I don't know the particulars of what is actually at hand. Like, I'm going to speak to sort of my philosophy on this issue, as I've
Hmm.
heard it from frontlines advocates and supports in our city, and certainly in my ward. Um, so one thing I didn't know before I got started is that, while you can like drug use, okay, like a bit of a trigger warning perhaps, you can inject your drugs at this site, but you can't smoke them. So that's why we see these individuals smoking. You typically, like the drugs outside are done inhalations, right? And so
Hmm.
I find that to be quite interesting. So if we're really going to provide a safe consumption site, like let's go all the way. I find like we've sort of taken idea and sort of landed in a half measure. And I think
Yeah.
conservative folks who hate the idea of a consumption site feel that way, and those who are trying to provide the services to protect it and support those individuals feel the same way. We've
Hmm.
landed in a half measure. So if we're going to create a space for people to do drugs, I don't use drugs personally. It's not like, it's never like that. Yeah. But like, fine, create a space for them to smoke them too, and take them off our streets. I don't want to go to the grocery store and have to watch that. Like, and I
Yeah.
think we've landed at a place like that too, where I'm an empathetic person. I very much support these individuals. I acknowledge and respect the fact that these are human beings dealing with crisis in some form, and they are a part of our community. And
Hmm.
so, but what I think is really important is that we find a path for them into a more productive and functioning place in our community. I
Hmm.
don't know that it's very dignified to simply leave somebody or sort of hold somebody in that position of addiction,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
with the multiple naloxones a day and that sort of thing. Like, there's something wrong there. And
Hmm.
as I understand it too, please understand, like, I'm not a expert in drug addiction or this sort of thing, but I think it's 2025, or quarter of the way through the 21st century. These are chronic issues that have plagued our society for decades, but drug addiction has evolved. It is not what it was 20 years ago. Mental
Yeah.
health crisis has evolved. It is not what it was 20 years ago. And so we have to approach these problems with new concepts, new perspectives. And there
Hmm.
are people, I mean, deep respect. We have an enormous amount of supports available in Ward 9. We have a
Hmm.
lot of organizations that work in community, that sort of come into downtown and support that, the safe consumption site, and all the individuals that are back and forth. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think
So
that makes a lot of sense.
good. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a really tricky one, and you're right. It sort of speaks to, again, what is a functioning relationship with the province, with our other partners on this issue? What does it look
Hmm.
like? You know, And
And that's the hard part is that,
yeah,
healthcare and mental health addictions, that's the province's
well,
lane.
it's a very easy place to bleed into ideology, right? Because
Hmm.
it's like, well, this is a sin or whatever. You know what I mean? Like individual, like I'm just choosing ideological pulls here. No, but it's sort of like it sort of lands into these are bad people or they're lost or whatever. It's like, and none of that is valuable to the point, because what
Yeah.
we are dealing with is somebody who is struggling with something, and
Hmm.
there's like science and healthcare will back this up and support it in one way or another.
Hmm.
And that costs money. So that's what they want from government, is like, what is the best path forward financially for us to
Hmm.
soothe an issue that's causing a sort of less tangible outcome.
Yeah.
Safety is subjective, right? My sense of safety is subjective.
Hmm.
How does an organization like a city support your sense of safety?
Yeah. Absolutely.
But, yeah.
It's definitely a multi-layered question.
These are the
And
deep cuts. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so you mentioned at the beginning that you're an independent candidate.
Mhm.
And so, we're seeing these political parties at the municipal level, which is definitely shaping things in an interesting way for this election. What does being an independent candidate mean for you and for your ward and your campaign?
Yeah. Politics has turned into I always made the analogy of it like a football game. You sort of have a team. It's turned into a sport.
Hmm.
And you've got like these deep loyalties to organizations. I hear words thrown around I've heard my whole life that don't seem to mean the same things they used to, like conservative and progressive. They don't, and so it's like I find it very frustrating, if I might be honest, and I'm being quite honest, frankly. But I find it all very annoying because, again, like so many of these issues don't require that kind of uh,
Hmm.
layer. We don't need that on top. So I didn't want to pick up a sword and shield for
Hmm.
some unknown organization that did very little to define itself as to what it was.
Hmm.
Over the last year, these folks announced a year ago. It's like, please, we're 5 days away. What can you tell me about any of them? I don't know
Hmm.
much. Um, and so what did I know? I know my community. I know my small business. I know that front door is open to the city of Calgary, that anyone can come through it, and that I would hope to do business with them.
Hmm.
You know, it's like I don't flip that sign to open to say only those in Inglewood,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
and it's like I just if my goal is to achieve this leadership position, what leader would you want to come in and say, yeah, this is great, but I only want to work with IT?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like, but it's like, no, that's not how this works. Like, so we need those individuals to come forward that have the guts and the capacity to sit across the table from people they don't necessarily agree with and
Hmm.
still try and form a conclusion that is respective of our community's needs.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's like I want to hear more people say that, and I would like to
Hmm.
raise the bar to say like this is what it takes. And I think
Hmm.
municipal governments is the place to do it. I mean, it's like we all live here. You can certainly be a liberal or a conservative or an NDP, provincially or federally, like have your fun. But it's like at the end of the day, we all come home and we all live next door to each other.
Yeah,
So to that
exactly.
end, it's like and we generally want the same things for our neighborhoods.
Hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
matters. So very proud to come forward independent. I think we should stomp the idea out. I hope that we'll see what the election results say, but I think the city, based on my conversations with folks, they really don't want it. I think
Hmm.
people are tired of the tension. People will always join in. Like if you ask them to hold a position, they will, whether
Yeah.
it's on something hot, like some big hot topic, like our consumption site or climate change or whatever it might be. But most people don't even want to have the conversation. They just want they don't want to have that fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Harrison, this has been a really, really great conversation, and I've really appreciated hearing your perspectives. But
Thank
as
you.
we wrap up, is there one thing you'd like to leave behind with our viewers today, whether or not they would be in your ward?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The city of Calgary is a beautiful city. It's fourth largest in the country, and that's only going to continue to grow. We are going to continue to evolve over the course of the next, for the rest of this century. It's a wonderful place, and you should be really proud of yourself for living here. I'm very proud to be here. Um, Take this election seriously. We're going to see 8 seats turn over. That's a really important change. It's never happened before. We've never had that many seats. People walk away from the seats at once. So big change there. And what the next 10 or 15 years, like the decisions we make now, will impact us for the rest of this, for the 21st century. So get involved, make some decisions, check out your candidates, and give your independents a fair shot. Thank you.
Well, you stole a lot of my closing remarks there, but I'll say a couple of them again. To our viewers, thank you for watching. Please continue to stay engaged. And if you're not informed in certain areas, please get informed. And most importantly, get out to vote. We need a higher voter turnout than we've seen historically, especially in this very important election. So please get out and vote. Harrison, thank you again for being with me here today.
Thank you.